Dr. Christine Blasey Ford is back in the news. In 2018, the professor accused now Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault during the summer of 1982. Blasey Ford is now out with a new memoir that takes the public into the story behind her September 2018 testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, which at the time was considering the nomination of Kavanaugh. She appeared on The View this week and opened up about her experience in her first live TV interview.
Tell us about the moment you realized, oh my goodness, he is going to be on the Supreme Court. I need to come forward with my story.
So I realized that as soon as Justice Kennedy retired, that it was a possibility, and I started to be concerned about it when I saw his name in the news on the short list, and I thought it was imperative that I share the data. And I knew it was going to be difficult, but I also realized it was going to be more difficult to not say anything, that I would just feel terrible if I didn't say anything, and that I wanted to share the information that I had about him.
But you also write in the book that you thought you could maybe just go to the FBI or go to someone. You didn't think you would ever be called in front of Congress.
Right. I never thought I'd have that day on television. I thought I would share the information with the senators, and they would do with it what they felt was necessary. So I thought I was being helpful. I was trying to collaborate with them, and it was a 3-month process of working up to that day on TV.
She said that she was not aware that the hearing would be televised until she walked into the room that day.
I was very adamant that I didn't want a camera, because I'm a little afraid of the camera. And they said, well, we need to have one camera so that all the senators will be able to see you. And they were telling me that when I was walking down the hallway, and it was too late to worry about it at that point. So they said it would be on C-SPAN, and I was just telling myself, okay, nobody's gonna watch C-SPAN. Like, my friends are all at work. None of my friends are gonna see C-SPAN at work. Fine. And then they said, well, C-SPAN, like something about people have the rights to pick up C-SPAN if they would like to, and clearly they did.
Blasey Ford also opened up about the threats she says she received since that day.
You say that there was a smear campaign against you, that you experienced death threats, and they basically made your life miserable, and you had to go into hiding. So speak about that a little bit without upsetting yourself, though. Because it's upsetting to think that people are out to get you for speaking the truth.
For trying to help, right? So, yes, so my family had to live away from our house the day that the news broke the story, and we left for one night, and we were gone for 3.5 months before we could go back. So, and there were a lot of really just horrible threats and threats against my kids.
Did you have any protection from the government?
Not from the government. Private citizens in my community donated to have a private security detail, so we had 4 security guards.
She also shared the communications that she had with Anita Hill, who accused then Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment.
Another brave woman who also blew the whistle on another Supreme Court justice is Anita Hill. And people didn't believe her either. And did you speak to her? Did she help you with this at all?
I spoke to her. We did an event in Seattle where I got to introduce her, and I asked her, how long is it going to take me to get over this? And it was about 1.5 years after I testified, and she said, she joked, like 25 years will do a lot.
Some people remain skeptical of your story, and you write that during the hearing, Senator Lindsey Graham wouldn't even make eye contact with you. Were you prepared for that kind of response?
I was prepared ahead of time that none of the Republicans were going to speak with me.
So with this case, I can't help but think about how long ago this was and how still today we have this problem with sexual harassment allegations being handled on college campuses across the country. I spoke with someone who was on the board of handling these accusations when they happen at one of America's Ivy League schools, and she said that it's an impossible decision. You basically have a choice whether you ruin this young man's life and believe the woman, or ruin her life by having her be in school and in classrooms with someone who did something awful to her. These accusations coming out many years later, I think highlights for me just feelings around how often these cases are mishandled, even when they are reported directly when they've happened, when evidence can still be collected. It seems that a lot of schools want to make it seem like they're far more safe than they are by not reporting crimes. We're seeing this to be a trend lately. And I think maybe cases of sexual assault, sexual harassment allegations, those are against the law. They should be handled by police instead of universities. And then maybe women would come forward a bit more, knowing that at least evidence would be collected and it wouldn't be in the hands, of people not trained to handle cases like this. Especially having this happen so many years later, it also makes me draw comparisons between, someone who is sexually assaulted or harassed not at a big elite university. Blasey Ford has a huge platform, but there are a lot of women, who are poor, who aren't getting the attention they need when violent crimes are committed against them. So it's hard to watch this and think about all of those things as well.
Yeah, that's fair. I think you're right that universities have no business handling sexual assault cases. Those should absolutely be referred to law enforcement. We've seen every time that a university attempts to handle one of these accusations, they either end up behaving in a way that's unfair to the accuser, or they end up stripping the due process rights away from the accused. That was something that Betsy DeVos sought to change when she was at the Department of Education, because there were all kinds of issues where the same people who were investigating the case were in charge of adjudicating it. They didn't allow the accused the opportunity to present present exculpatory evidence. They didn't allow them to bring lawyers in or to face their accuser and actually have them cross-examined. So they were very insufficient in a lot of ways. But let's get to the Christine Blasey Ford case, because I think that hers is fundamentally different than what we think about when we think of a typical sexual assault or sexual harassment accusation. Because Christine Blasey Ford did not have many details about the event in question. Her story that she told about this party where she was allegedly assaulted by Kavanaugh and his friend Mark Judge was struck down by all of the potential eyewitnesses, including her own friend, Leland Kaiser, who she says was basically her ticket to the party that day. Leland Kaiser, despite being a Democrat and really having no motivation to help Kavanaugh, came forward and said that she had no confidence in Christine Blasey Ford's story, that she didn't remember the party in question, didn't think it happened, and certainly didn't remember her friend being assaulted. Certainly it's possible that Christine Blasey Ford never told anyone else at the time. But again, you have her, you have PJ Smith and Mark Judge all rejecting that this party took place. We have calendars that were contemporaneous from Kavanaugh where there was basically zero way that there could have been this party. She was unable to remember the date, even the day of the week, whether it was a weekday or a weekend. She couldn't remember where the party was, how she got there, how she got home. And so basically you had this sort of amorphous story that you couldn't really prove or disprove because there simply weren't enough details available for either Kavanaugh to present discrediting evidence or for Christine Blasey Ford to present potentially corroborating evidence outside of the named witnesses who, again, all denied that anything like this ever happened.
I think the best way forward and the way to get justice, for Christine Blasey Ford, anyone going through this, even, justice for Brett Kavanaugh, who feels he was wrongly accused, is the way forward, the reaction to this as a society should be, okay, let's improve how universities handle this. This should be, a wake-up moment for every university that is trying to handle this internally. Whenever there's sexual assault, sexual harassment allegations, hiring professionals to deal with it. Many universities have to pay very expensive settlements when these cases are mishandled, regardless of the accused being guilty or not in a court of law. I think it should be a time for it to be a wake-up moment. Of course, we're never going to be able to definitively say whether or not a sitting Supreme Court justice committed sexual assault or not. And that's a scary position to be in. It really makes you reflect on the justice system and changing the environment around reporting, allowing, a process where women can come forward and feel safe, and a process that is just and protects the accused until they are found guilty. That should be the response to this, finding a way forward. It does seem to me like everyone does the best with the cards they've been dealt, but Christine Blasey Ford not taking a bigger advocacy route and taking, her time on these talk shows to really talk about the mishandling of these cases and wanting women to report. We've heard her say some things like this before, But it seems that the focus right now is telling this story. I'd really like her to pivot more towards advocacy. How do we move forward so this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder how this would really help with the university issue, though, because this did happen when they were in high school, or the alleged thing happened when they were in high school and at a private residence. But all of your points about the university system are well taken. Just getting into a little bit more of what she said during this interview with The View, there were a few things that stuck out to me as a little bit odd. She claimed that she didn't know that this hearing in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee was going to be televised, which sort of gave this impression that the senators on that committee sort of threw her to the wolves. And I think actually her legal team, if this is true, are the ones who did her a disservice, because the lawyers that she was working with had spent a significant amount of time negotiating with the Senate Judiciary Committee as to how many cameras were going to be there, what networks were allowed in. This was a huge part of the pre-hearing prep, was determining how exactly this was going to be televised. And so if they didn't prepare Christine Blasey Ford for that, then that's 100% on them. And she should be angry with her legal team for not making it clear to her what exactly she was going to be there that day to do. She also talks about her corroboration with the Democratic senators, which was always an odd thing for me, because she often claimed in her testimony that she wanted to stay anonymous throughout the process, and she didn't want this accusation even becoming public at all. But the first place that she went was actually not to Dianne Feinstein. She attempted to give the allegation to the Washington Post and the New York Times through their tip line, and when they didn't follow up on it, that was when she ended up sending this letter to Dianne Feinstein. And the late Dianne Feinstein completely mishandled this as well. She basically kept it under wraps for multiple weeks as they were going through the nomination process for Brett Kavanaugh's potential to be a Supreme Court justice. And it wasn't until she told some of her Democratic colleagues that she had this that they encouraged her to bring it public. And this was only a couple of days before the Senate Judiciary Committee was supposed to vote to advance Kavanaugh's nomination to the full Senate for a vote. And so it ended up delaying the whole process rather significantly, and did lead to this sort of rushed process that the Senate Judiciary Committee had to undergo in terms of evaluating the veracity of Christine Blasey Ford's claims and getting her out to D.C. for an interview. Where she said that she had to delay that by several days because she was afraid of flying, then eventually made it out to D.C. So there was just so much about this process that was handled incorrectly by the people in Congress. It wasn't until after the fact that the letter existed was leaked to the media that they even referred this to the FBI for its investigation, which ended up finding that they could not corroborate the allegation. That should have been the first step, going to the FBI to make sure that this was handled appropriately and investigated by individuals who actually have the ability to do it, rather than sending it to a Democratic senator just a couple of days or a few weeks before Kavanaugh was supposed to be voted on.
Yeah, I think also, yes, they were in high school, but they were also both in expensive prep high schools where teens have expensive cars, they have the money to go do a lot of partying. I think these kids growing up too fast is a big part of this. Making sure that kids have leisure activities is a major part in reducing crime and reducing sexual assault as well. I think high school, sitting around drinking beer, it's something that I did in high school, and I think back on it, I'm like, I should have been playing outside. And I think it's very difficult. You know, I grew up in an American town where there's not much to do but go get drunk in a field. That's scary, that in a lot of American towns, kids feel like there's no community for them. There's not much for them to do. It's a big factor here as well, and a big takeaway. But I think the fact that she had to hire security after this, just for saying her story, is scary as well. I think a lot of it came from a not so good place, not people upset with the justice system, not people upset with the accusations, but people upset about women speaking up for themselves. And that's a scary thought. And I think that is something that can discourage women from coming forward in the future. I really hope, she becomes an advocate for how to fix a lot of the problems that led to this in the first place. And having Brett Kavanaugh sitting on the Supreme Court, I don't feel great about it. I don't think, we should have the darlings of the Federalist Society running our country, making major decisions in that way. And the fact that he was accused and we have no result of it, I really fault the justice system for that more than anything else.
Yeah, I definitely agree that no one should be subject to threats. And, obviously, this occurred on both sides. Brett Kavanaugh was the subject of an attempted assassination after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which is obviously horrific. I did just want to say one more thing about what she was talking about on The View before we have to wrap. But I noticed that Joy Behar said to her that it was unfortunate that she faced these threats for simply speaking the truth. And she replied, for trying to help, which I thought was kind of a weird correction, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. More Rising after this.